What's going on, everyone? BT6 finally here. We've had about a week to play around with it. I think most of us have pretty much finished up our first deck. We've gotten all our cards. Maybe we've gone to our first local, and we've experienced the pain of getting Gabu bonded on turn 2. But there are other decks out there. We're going to go over them today. This is my early BT6 tier list. Like I said, the set has pretty much only been out for a week here in United States, North America, and we aren't getting our starter decks until the end of this week. So this is kind of a weird, temporary meta. Most of this is still going to stay true through to the end until EX1 comes out in, I believe, January. So let's just get right into it. My early observations of this meta, just from going to a couple locals and my own playtesting, is that there's definitely an increased power level and a speed of the game. Last format, we saw Lord Nightmon as our first advanced next level Digimon deck, and now it feels like every color is pretty much on that level or even higher. So there's just a lot more spam, a lot more speed, a lot more chance to lose the game if you make a single mistake. There's a lot more removal in the game right now, especially from black and yellow, and also blue with the Gabu bond effect. They can bounce your level 5s. It's hard to get things to stick on the board right now. In conjunction with that, security feels a lot more dangerous, like those aforementioned removals, Wyvern's Breath, Rattlestar, and even just non-removal effects that can happen in security. So let's say you're going against a Gabubon deck and your first swing into them, they check their mat. You pretty much did their job for them. The hardest part of that deck is finding that mat. Once they get the first mat out, it's just gravy for them, because then they can threaten the Gabubon every turn. They get their memory and their draw every turn. It's a pretty disgusting card to check in security. Black has Chikurimon and all the other nonsense, so just checking into security, even though DP values are lower, because bond decks are so rookie heavy, and they're going to be probably some of the most popular decks that you're going to play against. The other cards that are now in people's security are a lot stronger, so it kind of makes up for that balance, and it can be a lot more of a blowout if you check into the wrong security at the wrong time. Blockers in general, I noticed, feel a lot less impactful. Especially the 5k DP blockers are pretty easy to remove in this meta. 6k DP blockers have a bit more sticking power, and if you're playing black, then you have Craniumon to even help that out even more. But just in general, I feel like the value of blockers has gone down. Whereas last format, people were really doubling up on their blockers, playing even 7 or 8. This format, I think you're going to see 4 at the most. And I noticed that some decks are even just foregoing them entirely, and it doesn't even feel that bad. All right, and just everything combined, this whole everything's faster, there's a lot more removal, blockers feel worse to play, just means that your mistakes are very easily punishable. Every deck right now, if you make a misplay, the other person has a very strong chance to capitalize it and just blow out the game from there. So you have to be very conscious of your plays, what you're going for, and what your opponent's responses could be. Because if you make a misplay, then chances are you're going to lose based off that one misplay. Very little comeback potential in this format, I feel. Just lastly, I noticed that there's some unusual deck curves right now. For example, Jessmon has to play their Sistermons, so their ratios are kind of funky. Gabu Bond and Agu Bond don't play level 5s. What else? I guess Aosmon plays a shitload of level 5s. It's just a very strange meta. Security control just has always foregone standard play patterns. So just the way that games play out aren't as standard. Okay, I digivolve to level 3 and then level 4, pass my turn. The other person goes, I also digivolve to level 3 and then level 4. Just the variety of plays are much different now, and it makes the game a lot more interesting, and you also kind of have to break your patterns of thought from before. All right, and this is going to be my tier rubric, kind of what I'm evaluating each deck on. So this way you guys can kind of get an idea of what my grading system is and what I value in a deck. So for me to consider deck tier 1, you have to be very likely to play the deck, especially at top tables in a tournament. So for me, the popularity of the deck is probably one of the most important key factors in determining its tier status, because not only does a strong deck get played more, but the more a deck is played, then the more that you have to be ready to face it, and that you have to be prepared to either win in the mirror if you choose to also play that deck, or play a deck that has a strong matchup into it. So these are kind of like meta defining or meta warping decks based solely on that fact. Tier 1 decks have very strong, consistent win conditions. Oftentimes, even weaker pilots can win with this deck, aka the deck is carrying them. I mean, like, not always, okay? If you're a strong player and you're playing a tier 1 deck, your win rate is going to be above 50%, like for first places, like for tops. But if you're a poor player who maybe couldn't necessarily win with like a tier 2 deck, all of a sudden they're collecting wins with a tier 1 deck. I think that's a pretty clear indicator of a deck's strength. Also, the deck has to be consistent, so the win condition has to come up pretty much every game. And if the win condition doesn't come up, then it has other ways to also win. And finally, it has favorable matchups into the entire field. Maybe it has a couple weak matchups, but those are usually just like kind of decks specifically built to counter this deck. All right, so that's my definition of a tier 1 deck. Tier 2 deck, you are likely to play at least one of this in like a longer tournament. So this is something that you're more likely to see in the earlier rounds. Maybe they tend to get weeded out as the tournament progresses, unless they get good matchups and are lucky. This deck also needs to have a strong win condition that's usually on par, if not slightly weaker than the tier 1 decks. And also the strength of the pilot matters a lot more with tier 2 decks, because the baseline power level is just that little bit lower. The pilot's strength needs to be that much higher in order to compensate, in my opinion. All right, a tier 2 deck usually has at least 1 to 2 favorable matchups into the meta, and one of those favorable matchups has to be into a tier 1 deck. So if you don't have a favorable tier 1 matchup, then in my opinion, you're a tier 3 deck. But if you have at least one and you can consistently win out against tier 1 decks, then you're probably at least a tier 2 deck. And finally, it's just I put has an unfavorable matchup against a popular deck, or is just a worse version of a higher tier deck. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to expound on that. Tier 3, you are unlikely to face this deck at the top tables. You'll probably only play a tier 3 deck in like the first 2 or 3 rounds of a tournament. They tend to get weeded out by then. It has a fun or a novel win condition. I think the keyword here is fun. There really isn't a reason to play a tier 3 deck unless you're just kind of like trolling, or you really think you're just that much better than everyone you're playing against that you can win with the tier 3 deck. But these are mostly fun decks, or old decks that you just don't want to upgrade for whatever reason. Tier 3 decks tend to be inconsistent, heavily pilot dependent. They might have like a strong cheese matchup into like a tier 2, tier 1 deck, and that could maybe like put them in contention. Maybe they'll like get a cheese win off someone. But for the most part, they have hard losing matchups into all the popular decks. All right, so those are that's my rubric for what I consider to be decks, like where I would put them in tiers. All right, so for this early BT6 format, tier 1, obviously we all know, is Gabu Bond. Their Warp Digivolve turn, very explosive, and it can swing the entire board. They can pretty much clear 2 of your guys and kill 3 of your security, or they can kill 3 of your guys and kill 2 of your security. The turn that they choose to warp, I think that's like the major key decision point of the deck, and kind of separates the lesser Gabu Bond players from the stronger ones, whereas like a lesser player would be inclined to warp at the first chance they get and then kind of just bust their nut and then have nothing to go off from there. The deck kind of tends to putter out if they do that. A strong player will kind of chip away with their rest of their cards. So if they're playing the Rookie Rush variant, they'll get in there with their Octomons and just like chipping away with their Gabumons. Or like the ancient version will have more Lobomons, and they have like the ancient Garuru Warp as their backup plan. And then finally, when they force their opponent to play into their bond, then they warp and they finish the game from there. This deck has very high consistency, a lot more than the Gabu Bond version because of Davis. They also have just more draw power inherently with because it's a blue deck. They have access to Hammer Spark and Blue Memory Boost, or Howling Memory Boost right now, but eventually they get Blue Memory Boost. So I think the deck has a lot of very powerful consistency. They will see the warp at least once per game, unless they're very unlucky, but they'll probably see it once per game. You should count on it. They have the ability to threaten with hybrids. They play so many Tamers, and they play like 4 Lobos, and even Kendo Garurumon people play, so they can cheese out attacks that way. And if you hit their mat in security when you swing early, it's just a BG. You just feel bad, and you just want to go next. You just did half the job for them. All right, so this is definitely, in my opinion, like the definitive tier 1 deck of this format. It's cheap, it's strong, and it carries bad players for sure. So this is, and it makes really good players even better. All right. The second tier 1 deck is Security Control. Security Control just got way more insane post BT5. I know a lot of you have been asking me for my how to beat BT6 security control video. It's in the works. I need to grind some more games out against the deck in order to like give some like decent advice, which I'm working on right now. But just a quick snapshot of the deck. It just has answers to everything right now. If you try to go wide, which was like the tech from last format, they can just punish you with Iron Fist or Gewalt Schwarmer. So just like the new black options are just insane for that deck. If you just try to go into like a big tall stack, then they have Ultimate Flare or Wyvern's Breath, which kills Craniumon, which is historically a pretty good out to security control. If you just try to hide in your raising area and like build like one big Digimon and then like throw like a delicate plan on it and then just like swing for their whole stack, they just run Sekuyamon now, so they're going to security -3 you for free when you come out of raising. So that kind of stifles that plan. And the deck is just a lot more consistent now. They don't have to play red cards anymore, since Wyvern's Breath is basically just yellow Gaia Force, and the black security options are just like way more insane now. And they also have Reinforced Memory Boost now, so they can be a bit more choosy in how they stack their security. Like last format, they had to rely on Izzy to stack their heals, but now they can just do it with Reinforce, and they also gain 3 memory when they delay. So yeah, it's just a strong deck. It's unfortunately a very, very strong deck. There's not much we can do about it right now. There are some techs, like there's Delicate Plan, BT1 War Greymon. I'll make a whole video about it. We'll go into it later. All right, tier 1.5 decks. So I didn't really specify this in like my rubric, but this is essentially, I feel like Gabu Bond and Security Control are just like that much better. Like they're just like that little bit much better than these decks that I think they're just like a half tier above. These are still pretty much tier 1 decks though, for the most part. So top of tier 1.5 Jesmon. If they open the nuts, it's just go next. You just scoop up your cards and you just get, all right, game 2. Unfortunate, but it's just, if it happens, it happens. Luckily, the deck is pretty much a brick city. They have to run like the weird ratios to fit in the Sistermons, and then if they don't see Savior, it's weird. So it's a weird deck to build. I think Jesmon wins in deck building for sure. Like the way that the person chooses to build their deck is going to define how they win. As all red decks do, they have access to a Delicate Plan, which is very strong in this format because of all the security flying around. And just in general, I feel like Jesmon is a deck that's going to benefit a lot from how good the pilot is, how good they are at deck building, how well they understand their deck, and if they're lucky, it's pretty much BT6 equivalent of Imperial Dramon. Very, very similar in that regard. Next, tier 1.5 is black. So following up on kind of like the theme or identity it picked up last format, this is kind of like a toolbox anti-meta deck. The deck has answers to pretty much everything every other deck is trying to do. Craniumon can like live for a little bit against security control. You can boost your Craniumon up to really fat with the level 5 guy. What's his name? Gogmamon. So the Craniumon can wall out a Bond or even Jesmon. Craniumon can hit 20k, which is pretty large for one turn, but it's enough to buy you one turn. Sometimes all you need. Their security is naturally strong with Chikurimon, Ultimate Flare, Iron Fist, Alphamon. Omnis are 15k, which will kill bonds if they try to check in security. So oftentimes when I've been playing black, I will let a big swing go through because I'm usually pretty confident that my security will out me. Like almost always my security will out me at least once. So that's a good part of the deck. You have access to Millenniumon, Zwart Defeat, Alter S, which are all good cards in this format right now. So it's just a very strong deck. There's a lot of ways you can go with it. Genkumon and Craniumon especially are like houses in this format. Like they're super, super good, super strong cards. And I guess lastly I threw in here this Commandramon version of the deck that's been winning and topping. Commandramon it's just a good value engine, and it lets you keep up pressure with other decks right now. So I think that's an interesting way to take the deck. I haven't tried it myself, so I'm not going to speak too much on it, but it does seem strong. And last tier 1.5 deck is Three Musketeers. Three Musketeers probably has the best late game out of all the decks right now. Once they start being able to stop BL Star Mons for practically free, and then just playing like Nailbones and all their other crazy security cards, then it just becomes too much to get over. They also have their strong security because they play all their option cards, and they have strong access to Zwart Defeat and Millenniumon, which are all great cards this format. I will say, like any other purple deck, it's very pilot dependent. Purple, for whatever reason, tends to be a very like skill intensive color. Well, it's not for whatever reason, it's because of like the milling and having to like have forethought for your plays. But yeah, we'll actually talk about that more with Titamon. These are all the tier 2 decks in this format. I feel like all these decks you can win. You can go to locals with these decks and win. Maybe if you go to like a bigger tournament, maybe you won't climb as much with it, but if you are strong with your deck and you know your matchups and you've practiced a lot, you will definitely see very good results. So first off, Titamon. I don't know too much about this deck just because no one really plays it at my locals, but I've been watching like top videos. Just saw that video of the guy who won the Gaia Force Gaming on, I think it was Taste of Victory's channel. Shout out him. He posted his Titamon deck with the red and a delicate plan splash. That seemed very, very cool. So, and just Titamon just in general, like you just eye test this card. It's a good card. And if you're a purple player, then this is definitely a deck worth considering. Moving on to Agubond. This is basically just like the less consistent version of Gabu Bond. The warp turn is less explosive, so you don't clear as much board. And you can check the same amount of security, but if you do that, then you kind of sacrifice clearing board because you have to waste your swing on hitting into one of their Digimon, and instead of restanding, like you get security plus, so you can't like just restand swing again. You just lose your security plus by attacking a Digimon. But on the other hand, what it does gain is that you have stronger access to security cards. So you have Geo Greymon to delete stuff, Gaia Force, of course. You get Atomic Blaster, I think it's called, from the starter deck. So your security is a lot more stacked than Gabu Bond. It's a lot scarier to attack into Agu Bond. And ironically enough, this deck has a stronger security control matchup by virtue of it being red. So again, you have access to ADP, the Agu Bond effect, which trashes a security. Trashing security very good this format. And when the starter decks come out, you can tech in the Guimon to warp into Gallantmon and then trash security that way as well. So I think that's kind of an interesting take on the deck that we might see. All right, next tier 2 deck is Mastermon. In BT6 specifically, we actually got good level 4s for yellow finally, and one of those I feel like is Mimicmon. Mimicmon is on play if you're at 3 or less security, gain 2 memory, which essentially reads play Mastermon for 2 memory. Very, very good. So especially since Mastermon, again, trashing security, very strong effect in this format. Very, very, very strong effect in this format. Boost for game, still good. You're going to see a lot more of the Angelomon inheritable effect that lets you play level 3s from your hand for free. Very good effect still. Dynasmon, we got Dynasmon as a secondary boss monster for the deck. It synergizes pretty well with the whole trashing your security stuff. And of course, because Millenniumon is purple, we get access to Zwart Defeat and Millenniumon. No regular Zwart since you're playing yellow base. But Zwart Defeat can pop Tamers, which is good against Agu Bonds, Gabu Bonds, and Millenniumon just outs a lot of strong cards this format. Alright, number 4, Lord Nightmon / Yellow War Greymon. You can play these in the same deck, or you can play them in their own separate decks. For the most part, like the base of the deck stays the same. Again, didn't gain much outside of the better level 4s. Specifically in this instance, the Wizardmon and the 8mon. Wizardmon, especially for War Greymon, I think is pretty good. In general, just this deck feels less powerful by virtue of the fact that everything else got more powerful. So it's kind of everything else is on its level or better. Or in the case of Jesmon, it just does what Lord Nightmon tries to do, but like better. So you can still play this deck. You'll probably still win games, but I think there's just better things to play. But I will say that main War Greymon, like just like 4 War Greymons as like your main boss, I think is probably better than Lord Nightmon right now. I think that card is pretty insane still. And last tier 2 deck I'm going to talk about is Lilith Loop. Same as last format, except they have a better white tamer now. They don't have to play Matentai. They can play Manoa and have constantly 3 memory, which is pretty good. And as per usual with purple decks, extremely pilot dependent. Like, you need to be on your shit to play Lilith Loop. I feel like if you brain fart for a little bit, it's just doomed with this deck for sure. Alright, tier 3. Tier 3 decks. First tier 3 deck to talk about is Azulangmon. You can definitely swing fat with Azulangmon. There are definitely some annoying inheritables that are worth source stripping. But why would anyone play this over Gabu Bond? Well, to have fun. So that's why we're here in tier 3. Alright. Number 2, Eosmon, the Great White Cope, as I like to call it. This is the Great White Cope. Everyone get their copium out and think Eosmon is good like me. But realistically, this is just a fun deck. It is a very fun deck to play just because of all the searching you can get off, especially when you get like your multiple Manoas going. But it's just it just lacks like that certain extra punch, and this deck is very prone to fizzling, especially if you don't see Manoa. The Tamer is pretty much the linchpin of this deck, I found. If you don't see multiple copies of Manoa, then you're kind of just dead in the water. You run out of steam too fast. But there are like interesting ways to just take the deck, since the Eosmon engine is like probably like 30 cards tops, depending on how many level 5 Eosmons you want to play. So you can kind of fill the rest out with whatever you want. You can do yellow and Spiral Masquerade. Synergizes pretty well with the Eosmon spam. There's like this weird like bond hybrid version that you can play, because level 4 Eosmon can play Nokia. Then you use Nokia to play your Agumons or your Gabumons, and then Manoa can search any tamer, not just white tamers, so you can look up your Mats and Ties that way. It's interesting for sure. It has potential. But why would you play that over just like a regular Gabumon or Agumon deck? I don't know. For fun. That's why we're here. Green base, just like straight up Eosmon is fine. Just boring. Like, why play the boring version of the fun deck? And then security control style. I guess it's like budget security control, but it's not really budget because you still have to spend money on like security control cards like Magna Angemon. I don't know. Imperial Dramon. This deck will probably be tier 2, tier 1.5-ish once EX1 drops. But for right now, it's just a worse version of Jesmon. Number 4, Greymon Tribal. I think this deck has like the most tools to straight up win out against security control, because you have like the easiest access to the BT1 War Greymon, which doesn't activate option effects, it checks in security. You have ADP, and then when the starter decks come out, you can warp Guillemon into BT1 Gallantmon pretty easily. You can pretty easily fit that in. So it's interesting if like there's like 2 or 3 guys trolling your locals with security control because they just want to play the mirror, I guess, I don't know, then maybe build this deck. Could be fun. And the last tier 3 deck I'm going to talk about is just green, just plain old green. Poor green got left in the dust. They got cucked by Eosmon and they didn't get any cool new toys. So you pretty much just play the same deck as last format, except you could fit in like the level 4 hybrids or Ancient Troy. I guess like in theory, like I don't even know if you could like get 6 attacks off in OTK with the hybrids, because I think it costs too much memory. Because yeah, Chaosmon costs 6, unless I guess you could like do some weird like Mega Digimon fusion thing. I don't know, but yeah, it's just the same deck as last format, except everything got so much better. So it just feels bad. If there's a lot of black players at your locals, this deck does still have a pretty good black matchup. So keep that in mind. But just in general, unless you're a green guy for life like me, you're probably not touching this deck this format, unfortunately. Alright, so that's just my quick meta snapshot. Early BT6, almost starter decks here if you're in North America. Won't really shake up too much, except for it'll make security control better. And it'll make Agubond more consistent, and it'll make Gabumon better. So that's really all there is to expect from the starter decks. Hope you guys learned something from the video. I'll be going more in depth into a couple of the key decks. Definitely have a how to beat Gabumon in the works, how to beat security control BT6 definitely in the works. Yeah, just stay on the lookout. Hoping to drop more videos now that the set is finally out and I can get my hands on it and play it and learn and help you guys learn. All right, GG's.